All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. Happy Friday, everybody. Hope all of you guys have had an amazing week. Well, we had the JJ Redick news come down yesterday, and we went for about 10 minutes just giving my initial impressions on the hire, but I've had another day now to kind of sit down and think it all over, and I could think of nobody better for us to get into the weeds of the JJ Redick hire than my friend Jovan Buha, who covers the Lakers for The Athletic and also has been doing some work for us over the course of the last year. We're going to get into every single angle of this. We're going to talk about the hiring process. We're going to spend a good amount of time on the X's and O's side of things. I tried to sit down today and think about all the different areas of improvement for this particular Lakers team and how JJ can help. And Jovan and I are going to go back and forth about that for a little bit. And then at the tail end of the show, we are going to talk about the offseason and what direction we think the Lakers at this point are going to be looking to go in terms of personnel, which in my opinion is a way bigger deal than anything having to do with the coach anyway. Real quickly, before we get started, subscribe to the Hoops Tonight YouTube channel so you don't miss any more of our videos. Follow me on Twitter at _JasonLT so you guys don't miss show announcements. Don't forget about our podcast feed, wherever you get your podcasts under Hoops Tonight, and then keep dropping mailbag questions in the YouTube comments. All right, without any further ado, let's bring on Jovan. So, Jovan, this has been kind of a wild couple of weeks for you, I would imagine. Why don't you just kind of let us under the hood a little bit, tell us about what the last month or so has been like as you've been tracking this process. How did we land with JJ Redick as the head coach of the Los Angeles Lakers?
Well, Jason, it's been a wild 7 weeks for me, dating back to May 3rd. The Lakers fire Darvin Ham. I'm on my way to a wedding in Mexico, and I thankfully I had done my prep work of had the story ready, had my YouTube video ready, but from that point, all of the chatter that I was hearing from talking to people within the Lakers and around the league was JJ Redick. And that was all the buzz for basically all of May. And when you fire a coach, you do so with at least a couple candidates in mind. So for the Lakers, that was JJ Redick and Ty Lue. Now, the problem with Ty Lue was he was still under contract with the Clippers for another year. He also had the whole situation with the Lakers back in 2019, but the Lakers were trying to make amends. And if he somehow was in a lame duck situation and could get out of his contract with the Clippers, the Lakers were going to pounce on that and make him a big offer to be their head coach. So through early to mid-May, the buzz was Ty Lue, JJ Redick. Then it started to be the actual interview process with guys like Sam Cassell, James Borrego, Mike Nori, David Adelman. Ty Lue ends up coming to an extension with the Clippers, and it's clear that maybe from his side, that was a little bit of a negotiating tactic where if you have interest from another team, now all of a sudden there's some onus on the Clippers to get something done a little bit quicker than they had initially wanted. So interview process starts. JJ Redick meets with Rob Pelinka for nearly 2 hours in Chicago at the pre-draft combine. And it is sort of an informal meeting technically, but 2 hours is a long time to talk with someone. And I think you get a pretty good sense of someone and their background and their philosophies. And, they did touch on some of those things, but, so that's about mid-May now. And then rest of the month, it just continues to be the buzz growing of JJ Redick is going to be the guy. The one thing that is holding this process up is that he's set to call the NBA finals for ESPN and ABC. And in the middle of the season, ESPN and ABC lost Doc Rivers, who was part of that top broadcast crew. So you then promote JJ Redick to that spot, and you don't want to lose him right before the pinnacle of the season. So that was a bit of a holdup, according to multiple people, of just, JJ is going to have to ride this out through the finals. And if he ends up being the Lakers head coach, it's going to have to be after the finals. Then early June, it starts to really be JJ. But then this Dan Hurley situation comes out of nowhere seemingly, and all of a sudden, there's he's flying to LA. There's a meeting. The Lakers make him an offer. Now the offer, people can quibble about how strong of an offer it actually was. Clearly, it was not strong enough to get him to leave Connecticut, and he even said, and he did multiple interviews, and in the Dan Le Batard interview, he says there was a number. I don't know exactly what it was, but I'm sure there was a number that would have got me to leave. Clearly, the 6 years, $70 million deal was not that. So then the Lakers have to circle back with JJ Redick and some of the other candidates and then do some damage control. bring him in officially for an interview in between game 4 and game 5 of the finals. On that Saturday, I was told by multiple people he crushed the interviews, was incredibly impressive. One person told me that his personality was electric, and it was just like unlike anything that compared to all the other candidates, it was just like and we knew JJ was going to crush the interview. I don't think that's a surprise, but like he really stood out from just his communication and his personality and like his ability to talk through different scenarios. So he crushes the interview on Saturday. On Monday, he has an important conversation with Anthony Davis. The two talk on the phone. And that was important because Anthony Davis had sort of been backing James Borrego, who he overlapped with in New Orleans briefly after being drafted. So, he talks to JJ. They get on the same page. They talk through the offense and sort of what the vision is for AD being more involved in fourth quarters and crunch time. And then so then a couple days. So the finals on Monday. JJ gets a couple days to decompress, be with his family, think over the situation, and then Thursday morning he gets the contract offer and they agree to terms. So that is the sort of timeline of the last 7 weeks. And there was lots of twists and turns with the Dan Hurley situation. James Borrego was technically the first candidate to get an interview in person. So like there was some detours along the way, but from the beginning, most of the buzz was JJ, and this ended up playing out that way ultimately.
Yeah, the timeline seemed pretty simple to me in the sense that, like, yeah, you don't want. I think JJ would have honored ESPN and gone and covered the finals even if he had taken the job. I mean, obviously we know behind the scenes he kind of thought it was his to have anyway, but at the same time, I could see why ESPN wouldn't want the broadcast team like just naturally discussing JJ coaching the Lakers while they're trying to cover the finals. So like it made some sense on that front. And then Dan Hurley's one of those guys too, where, if his name comes up as an option, you just have to explore it. You can't just be like, nope, we already have our guy. Like go, there's a certain due diligence you have to do there, even if it was a long shot. And it all seemed pretty standard and natural. There was definitely some drama on the reporting front. I thought it was bizarre how Adrian Wojnarowski was just kind of covering it as though the JJ was never in the picture and it was always about Dan Hurley. It was kind of weird. It seemed pretty natural flowing to me that JJ was their guy. Another option came to the surface. They explored it. It didn't pan out. They were patiently waiting for the end of the finals, and then JJ became the option. Now, before we kind of get back into JJ, I was wondering, I have a couple of quick follow-ups. First of all, was there any consideration for Monty Williams after he became available the other day?
No, I've been told no. There had been some Monty buzz in May it was trending toward him potentially being fired. And there was a sense of, similar to Ty Lue, Monty Williams was someone the Lakers previously pursued in 2019. He was the number 2 choice behind Lue. And had he become available, I think like a month ago, I think he would have been interviewed and had a legitimate chance to win the job. But I think at that point they were too far along with Redick to seriously consider that. And I mean, if they had pivoted to no, let's stall, let's iterate, first they're running out of time. The draft is in 5 days, but also it's I think at that point had they spurned Redick a second time for another candidate, that might have been a deal breaker.
Yeah, I view Monty Williams too as like the old guard of NBA coaches. It kind of fits into that like Doc Rivers kind of mold where there's just it almost seems like they're disconnected from where modern basketball is going, and their own personalities almost become bigger than the team. Yeah. It almost just seems counterproductive. So I feel like they made the right decision to not look down in that direction. So just really quickly before we move on, how did you interpret the whole like Woj Dan Hurley thing? Was that like, do you think that there was some gamesmanship going on there, or was there truth to what he was saying about Hurley being the target the whole time?
It's this part of the story is, I will say, like I've been covering the NBA since 2011. This is going to be my 7th season as a beat writer. This was the craziest like wrinkle to a story I can remember personally, because even coming like typically, I mean, there will be things that blindside you covering the NBA, of be it trades, signings, firings, hirings. Like there's an element of secrecy for sure, but this is still a situation where you talk to 5 different people with and around the team, and you will get 5 different answers, 5 different conspiracy theories, 5 different perspectives as to what actually happened with this situation. So for me, my best read on it, I would say, is there was legitimate interest from the Lakers end for Dan Hurley. Like, they made him, I mean, they flew him out, they interviewed him, they risked losing because like there was a scenario in which this plays out and JJ just says like, peace. Like, I don't like, you guys were, indicating one thing, then you flipped that and now you're interviewing Hurley, and like, I'm out. And JJ could have, and then all of a sudden now it's James Borrego, or maybe it is Monty Williams now that he's available. But like, I think that the Lakers would have been on like plan C or D at that point. So there was some real risk for the Lakers in terms of pursuing Dan Hurley and having this come out the way that it did and being this like spectacle. Like there was some real risk on their end. So I do believe that the Lakers had legitimate interest in Dan Hurley. Now, was it the level of interest that they were willing to make a Godfather offer that he couldn't refuse? And the type of, 8 years, $100 million had been thrown out there. Like, had they put that on the table, I think he's probably the coach. And they clearly were not willing to do that. So there's an element of like, you could want something, but not want it to the extent that you're going all in. So it's still unclear to me if they were quite all in on Dan Hurley. Like, they clearly were very interested enough to make an offer. But it seems to me it might have been a situation where it was more like, we want you and we're willing to give you this contract, but we're not going to go above this. And if you're not willing to accept this, we're fine with getting our first choice pretty much the whole way, which was JJ Redick. So as for like the Hurley communication, my sense was they reached out to him initially when they made the initial candidate pool, and he was not interested at that time. Since then, ESPN and the LA Times have reported that Hurley met with Pelinka apparently kind of secretly at the combine, and they had some conversations there. So, if that's the case, then obviously, there was maybe some interest around then, but still, in talking to a lot of people around the Lakers, like, this was something that was kept very internal, very tight-lipped. Like, it might have only been 3 or 4 people who knew about it, including players not knowing about this. So they did a good job of like moving in secrecy with the move. And look, I think if Dan Hurley had been available from the beginning, I think he would have been the no-brainer first choice. So it makes sense why the Lakers went after him. I think the thing that is less clear is how serious Dan Hurley was about this situation, right? Because really, if you look at who had the most to gain here, it was basically Dan Hurley. And now he got elevated. Like, I don't follow college basketball. Like, I knew who he was, but I don't follow college basketball that much. I know UConn had won back-to-back, but it's like, now I know a lot more about Dan Hurley over the last few weeks than I had previously known. And like, he's been elevated to a certain status that, he probably deserves because of his accolades. But like, I don't think he's clearly talked about way more now. And he just did a giant press tour after this whole situation. So
yeah, 35
it's
interviews.
like, I don't know. There's like, so that part of the doesn't necessarily pass the smell test to me, but I know from the Lakers, like, I'm not as plugged in on the college basketball side or the Hurley side, but I can say from the Lakers side, there was legitimate interest. It's just, there's also degrees of interest, and clearly they weren't willing to go past that 670. And that to me indicates they were fine with JJ. If it didn't work out with Hurley, they were fine, picking JJ.
I appreciate that JJ didn't take it personally too. Like, again, like, I'm excited about what JJ can be as a coach, but he doesn't have any coaching experience. Dan Hurley is one of the most respected and accomplished coaches in the country right now. You know what I mean? Like, the volume was looking for an NBA analyst, and they had been talking to me, and then suddenly JJ Redick came available. It'd be stupid for me to be offended that they would consider JJ or probably hire JJ over me. He's JJ Redick. He's arguably the best in the world at what he does, right now in the sports media space. And so like, I appreciate, to your point, there's some risk. But like, I appreciate that JJ didn't take it personally, because again, that's just an avenue you have to explore if it becomes available. You know what I mean? Get ready for a night full of big fights and big action. It's UFC 303, and it can be even bigger. Jump in on all the action at DraftKings Sportsbook, the official sports betting partner of the UFC. It's super easy for first-timers to get started. Try betting on something simple like picking a fighter to win. Go to the DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your fighter, and place your first bet. It's that simple. The light heavyweight title is on the line in the main event, but there are so many more amazing matchups happening in Vegas. And speaking of amazing, if you're new to DraftKings, listen up. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's HOOPS. That's code HOOPS for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Get that big fight feel. Only on DraftKings. DraftKings, the crown is yours. So I want to move on more to the basketball side of this, which is to me the far more fascinating side. Just tell me a little bit about the interview, the formal interview when JJ came to LA. What if you were to kind of like explain, like if you had to just kind of translate JJ Redick's pitch for how to take the Lakers to the next level, how would you word that for us?
Yeah, so JJ met on Saturday he'd previously met with Rob Pelinka, spoken with him multiple times over the course of multiple weeks, but this was his first chance to meet with Jeannie Buss, Joey Buss, Jesse Buss, and the real stakeholders in the Lakers and have conversations with them. So, my understanding was he met individually with each person, and then there was also some group conversations. But each person had their own set of questions and different parts of the organization and just basketball philosophy that they wanted to break down with him. And again, I was told he was incredibly impressive. The most impressive they only met with 3 different candidates: Borrego, Hurley, and Redick in person. All of the other interviews were done remotely, primarily with Rob Pelinka. So I guess among those 3 candidates, I was told JJ was the most personable, was just the most detailed, and he had multiple answers for any hypothetical that they were throwing at him. So one thing that he really pitched himself on was like, I know I don't have any coaching experience at the professional level, but I'm going to be adaptable. I'm going to come in with an open mind. And I'm not coming from a certain coaching tree or a certain coaching philosophy. Like, I'm going to be establishing this in this position, and I'm going to adapt to the roster and the season and how things are going. And I think coming from the situation with Darvin Ham and how that unfolded, there was an element of stubbornness with a lot of his mistakes, and that was really the biggest gripe with Darvin Ham was just the lack of adaptability with the rotation, with lineups, with his coaching philosophies. Be it pick and roll schemes or how the offense was being run, that Darvin Ham was, married to his philosophies. And JJ Redick came in and had basically the exact opposite approach of, I'm willing to adapt and continue to tinker and try different things. And then the other thing, which I think is arguably it's not X's and O's, it's not basketball strategy, but his communication skills and the ability to effectively communicate with players and command the locker room and get a level of buy-in was something that really appealed to them, especially coming off of Frank Vogel lost the locker room in his final season. Darvin Ham lost the locker room in his final season. And part of it was, with Frank, I think he's on the nicer side. He's a bit soft-spoken. With Darvin, there was elements of that, but there was also some elements of disorganization in terms of game plan and strategy. So I think JJ, not only having a certain level of adaptability and coming in with an open mind of like, I want to collaborate with the front office, collaborate with the players, and really make sure everyone is buying into the same vision of how we are running this team. There's that element, but it's also the element of effectively communicating with players and making sure, the plan is going to be the plan, and you're going to know where you are in the pecking order, where you are in the hierarchy, and if that changes, we will have an open and honest conversation about that, instead of because I would hear like stuff starts to trickle out, but you would hear stuff of like with Darvin, and this isn't to pile on Darvin, this is just to kind of contrast it, but like with Darvin, there might be like a certain plan at shoot around, and then in the pregame meeting that plan changes, and guys would feel like, I don't really know like why this is changing, or I'm not given a reason. I'm just kind of told like, hey, you're out of the starting lineup tonight, or hey, we're going with this look tonight. And with JJ, I think and he certainly, I'm sure, knew some of this stuff and was able to properly cater to the audience. And that's part of his skill clearly. But I also think like if we're looking at his strengths coming in from day one, I think it is his adaptable mindset. And that's based on just listening to his podcast, listening to his basketball philosophy, but it's also his communication skills. And he is far and away a better communicator than Darvin Ham or Frank Vogel. And I think that that's going to be an asset that from day one, he's able to communicate with the players in a direct way and even a confrontational way, but I think a way that's going to benefit them, where they're going to have the hard conversations early, and it's not always going to be pretty, but I think that's one of his clear skills from day one.
Yeah, I think specifically with the younger roster too. Like if we look back last year, now I think they will bring in a vet or two this year to try to kind of balance that. Because I would venture to guess if you asked LeBron on some truth serum, like what were your thoughts on the roster last year, one of the things he would say is he'd probably say we were a bit too young, and that I think reflects in some of just the lack of attention to detail that you saw on a possession by possession basis. JJ, I think, is going to have a relatively easy time bringing the certain amount of, presence or aura to communicate with a young player and get him to kind of like listen to what he has to say. But I think it will be contingent on LeBron kind of backing all of that and AD backing all of that. And so as long as LeBron and AD kind of stand behind JJ early on to help add, legitimacy to the things that he's saying, I think that a lot of JJ's communication will resonate. When I think about, and bear with me here for a minute because I'm gonna kind of go through my thought process on this. But like, his love for the game and his competitiveness, I'd give him like an A+. You just don't make it to the NBA as JJ Redick if you're not just a crazy MFer, for lack of a better word. And like, I actually think that we see this JJ that we see in the media, but I think he's got a nasty side, which I think will serve him well as a coach. Because I think there needs to be an element of that. You were talking about Frank Vogel being a little soft-spoken. Like, I think JJ is going to be an animated coach, and I think that's going to be a good thing. I mean, when I look around the NBA and I think about the best coaches, Spoelstra, Popovich, Kerr, Ty Lue, Michael Malone, like those guys are pretty animated and active and involved with what they're doing, right? The experience side, to me, experience is like one of the more overrated things, when it comes to this sort of thing. Like, I'd rather have a talented, inexperienced person over a mediocre, experienced person any day of the week, especially when it comes to these kinds of overly competitive professions. So the real thing that I think is fascinating is the actual basketball organization piece. And so bear with me. I'm just going to go through some of my thoughts on where I think JJ can really help. So I want to start with offensive organization. So one of the things that frustrated me last year was the Lakers took some massive leaps in their 5-out offense and just seemed to have awesome ball and player movement for extensive stretches and got a lot of really high quality looks that manifested in them being one of the best offenses over the tail end of the season. But I thought that there was a lack of value on individual possessions and in a kind of a tendency to get away from that from time to time. One of the guys that I think did a really good job of breaking this down this year is Tim Cranges, who does stuff, just a lot of X's and O's stuff, but he focuses a lot on the Lakers. And he was crazy enough to sit and chart like every single damn possession that the Lakers had this entire season. And he did a really nice job of kind of demonstrating the difference between when the Lakers ran set offense versus when they ran freelance offense. And freelance offense has a very important part in the game of basketball, and it needs to be, think of it as like 5-out motion. It's just kind of like read and react basketball that you lean back on after you've run a set action or after you end up in the half court. But I think the Lakers could be served well by being more deliberate about getting to a set early in the possession and then playing in the flow out of that. And there are too many possessions where they would try to push in transition to run early offense, which is good. You want to push up the floor when you can, because if you can get the defense in rotation without having to run a set, that's great. But there were too many of those possessions that when the transition push was kind of cut off, that they would flow into just like some basic ball screen or ISO or dribble drive, and the possession would fall apart early instead of pulling out, running a set, and then getting into action from there, or getting into your 5-out motion from there. And so just simply increasing the percentage of possessions when the Lakers actually run a set play versus and kind of cutting down on the possessions where they push and transition and then just kind of get into the flow before getting any sort of advantage. I think the attention to detail, valuing each individual possession more will help. As Cran just pointed out so well all over the course of the season, and as you can tell just by watching the film, when the Lakers would run their sets, they got great stuff all the time. There's just too much talent on the floor. There's too much basketball IQ in terms of the ability to read and react out of it. The weak link was Rui at the start of the season, and by the end of the season, he started to feel when he was supposed to cut along the baseline, when he was supposed to flow into the next action. They have the talent to be a truly great offense as long as they value each individual possession. Couple individual things too, like cutting down on pull-up twos. They took 12 per game last year and shot just 40% on them. That was 0.8 points per shot. D'Lo took a ton of them that were really bad shots that he was barely hitting like 39% of. Austin Reeves was the only player on the team that actually got more than 1 point per pull-up jump shot. And so I think like just cutting back on some of those, especially the ones early in the clock. The getting Anthony Davis more involved piece is really interesting to me. And we can let's bounce back and forth on this for a minute, and then we'll come back because I do have some thoughts on JJ on the defensive end of the floor. But with getting AD more involved, I 100% agree as it pertains to the overarching 48-minute game. Like there were way too many stretches where it'd be like a big third quarter run for the other team and AD hasn't touched the damn ball for 2.5 minutes. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing happened way too often. However, crunch time, AD has his own issues in those situations. He can struggle to read the floor from time to time. His inability to hit a jump shot can be an issue from time to time. The crunch time offense wasn't an issue for the Lakers last year. They were top 10 in the league. They had a 119 offensive rating in the clutch, and they had a 121 offensive rating in the clutch in the 3 postseason games where they ended up in clutch situations. So like, again, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I just don't necessarily think that's the strong suit of AD's game. I think the bigger thing is just sticking with the like JJ's a big believer in 3-man action, making sure that if LeBron has the ball in these clutch time situations, that AD's not just standing in the corner spacing or just setting a basic ball screen. Because if AD just sets a basic ball screen, most teams are going to switch that. And then AD's just going to go stand in the corner or stand in the dunker spot. 3-man action makes it so much harder to switch. And there were moments, especially in the Nuggets series, where the Lakers run a bunch of stacked pick and roll down the stretch of the game with D'Lo back screening for AD in those ball screens. And they got great stuff out of it. And that I think is great. Keeping AD involved in 3-man action at the end of games is great, but I don't think just force feeding AD in the clutch is going to solve the problem. And then the last thing I'll say before I bounce it back to you, they've got to invest more at the start of the season and throughout games in Anthony Davis's jump shot. I think especially as Jared Vanderbilt gets reintegrated next year, especially if they end up having some sort of big look where AD's at the 4, I think they're going to need AD to take at least 5-6 jump shots a game and be willing to take 3-point shots, especially out of the corner. And I shouldn't even say just out of the corner too. Like he's got to take pick and pop jump shots too, because those are open in the offense. But like there was way too often during the regular season where that just disappeared from AD's game and he'd take 1 or 2 jump shots a game for a month. And it's like, no matter how good he is as a jump shooter, if you don't invest in it so that he can build rhythm, that won't reap rewards down the end. And so I really want to see him just be more invested in over the course of the season as a jump shooter as well. But in general, I agree with getting AD more involved in the offense. I just don't necessarily think force feeding him in the clutch is going to solve all their problems. Do you agree?
Yeah. Yes, I do. And you mentioned the 3-man action. So that's something that we heard during this process of reporting was the Lakers and now JJ Redick are looking forward to these 3-man actions with LeBron, AD, and Austin Reeves. So I think you are going to see some stack pick and rolls and Spain pick and rolls with those 3 and a lot more 3-man actions. And I think the framing has been interesting where it's been, obviously, at some point, LeBron is going to retire and it's going to be Anthony Davis's team. So there has been a focus and an onus on how can we get AD more involved? How can we continue to funnel things through him a bit more? But the 3 names that we've heard over the last few weeks as focuses for the Lakers in terms of player development and how they fit with the roster is Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, and Max Christie. And I think that's kind of interesting with, I mean, you still have Jared Vanderbilt there. You still have Gabe Vincent. You have Jalen Hood-Schifino, Maxwell Lewis. So like some younger players, but like those have been the three names that the Lakers have been sort of treating as the foundation of the team in addition to LeBron and AD. So I think elevating Max Christie will also, I mean, that's a whole other conversation that we've had at various points, but like, I think he can step in and potentially be like a top 8 guy next season for them. Rui, either as a starter or as like a 6-man type. It's like microwave forward off the bench. So I think the Lakers, I mean, like it seems to be an acknowledgement of like who the best players on the roster are or who the better players on the roster are and the different ways to empower them. But yeah, and I think like the Lakers would, I remember with Frank Vogel, they'd run those pin down actions for AD that where he could curl or he could pop from the left side of the floor. And like they would occasionally do that with Darvin, but they didn't do it consistently enough. And I think that's the other thing is like, and this was something that we reported out during this process was like JJ's meticulousness and his attention to detail. And he's a guy who's very, I mean, honestly, borderline OCD in some way. Like you talk about doing his 342 shots from the same spots on the floor every day during the offseason. And like he's very routine based which is everything he does. And I'm sure like I'd love to pick his brain on the podcasting side as to like how he improved as a podcaster, because I'm sure he was very routine oriented with that and probably would watch back the film and take notes and like break it down almost like breaking down basketball. So like that's just how he's wired. That's his personality. And that was not and again, it's not to keep bringing up Darvin Ham, but like that was something that the Lakers struggled with last year. And I think JJ coming in, and I think he is going to be tracking some of these things. And that's another thing, that JJ is much more pro analytics than any coach the Lakers have had like ever. And the Lakers have kind of always like, they were one of the last teams to send an analytics group to the Sloan MIT sports conference. And they were one of the last organizations to beef up their analytics staff. So like the Lakers have always kind of been behind the curve with analytics and modern basketball. Even the last few years, like they've been among the league, among last place of 3-point attempts. And like last year they shot the ball much better, but they were still 28th in attempts. So it's like they have to modernize their offense as well. And I think one of the things that JJ has constantly talked about is like he has a good relationship with Joe Mazzulla, and I don't think Laker fans will love this, but like his son's favorite team is the Celtics, and like so he consumes the Celtics a lot. And what do the Celtics do? They take 40 plus threes a night. And there's obviously ways you generate those threes. You're not just taking threes to take them necessarily. But I think for the Lakers, like modernizing the offense and actually like, and everything was rim based. And I think there is an element of like, yes, you have LeBron, you have AD, you should be living in the rim. You shouldn't be making those guys take like, 10 plus threes a night. But there's also a balance to it where I just think in 2024 and beyond, you can't be 28th in 3-point attempts per game and expect to actually contend for a championship. So I think unless you're dominating all the other categories, which the Lakers weren't necessarily doing either. So I think for them, part of it's going to be, to your point with AD, like getting AD's jump shot going and potentially more threes. And that's been a talking point every preseason for like the last 3 years. So it remains to be seen if he'll actually do that. But even if AD isn't taking more threes, if they can find ways to just generate 5 to 7 more threes a game and shift that away from some of the pull-up jumpers, some of the mid-range stuff, and just modernize their offense, I think that could go a long ways. I mean, they were, again, second in the league, from February on. That could be first by a bit, right? Over the course of a full season, potentially, depending on how they reshape the roster. So I think JJ is going to come in with a very organized, very analytically driven, and I think he's going to bring an element to the Lakers offense that they have not had really ever, since the league has shifted over like the last decade.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Like if you could turn those 12 pull-up twos into 7 pull-up twos, and those 5 all become either rim attempts or 3-point attempts, like that's the thing. It's not so much the number of threes, because what's more efficient than threes? Rim attempts. So it's like, as long as you're just trying to tilt your offense towards those 2 types of attempts and away from the lower value attempts in the middle. Now, some of it's unavoidable, like LeBron James is 40 next year. So like, he's not going to stop taking pull-up twos, at least not to some sort of dramatic extent. But like, if you can get it, like if Austin's taking them and LeBron are taking them, but no one else is taking them, and they're primarily in rescue possession situations, meaning like late clock, need to get something going, just to kind of get something up on the rim before the end of the clock. I liked your mention of kind of JJ's focus on analytics. Like I like that he specifically mentioned in the reporting that I saw the focus on empirical evidence, which is basically like being able to, again, there's always two sides to this, because you don't want to overreact to evidence, especially in a small sample size, if you have an overarching basketball philosophy that you're trying to build out. So for instance, like the Laker early 5-out results were bad. And so if you actually just listen to the evidence, you'd be like, we were a better offense last year when we were running these spread pick and roll, cleared side pick and roll, just kind of like old fashioned 4-out brute force type of offense. If you bail on 5-out, you don't get the results that we got in the tail end of the season when everything clicked. So it's always a delicate balance, but at the same time, it's like there was abundantly clear evidence that the Taurean Prince at the 3 stuff wasn't working for the majority of the first part of the season, and they never bailed on that until it was too late, and then they were in some massive hole in the standings. And so I think just a better relationship with the data, a better understanding of how it works, and a better like willingness to listen to it will go a long way towards helping the Lakers kind of avoid some of those pitfalls. I think the defensive end is where that could be really useful. So like I was looking through the numbers today. The Laker defense was pretty bad, especially bad in the regular season after their offense started clicking. Now, they had some moments in the playoffs where they defended really well. I thought they defended the Nuggets pretty well for large stretches, but then they really struggled in crunch time, but I thought that was more personnel related. And there's this, I want to be clear before I go any further on this. There's a personnel element to this that has to be factored in. The Lakers do not have a starting caliber player that is an excellent perimeter defender and a plus offensive player. That doesn't exist on the roster, and that's something that they absolutely have to address going into this postseason, which we're going to talk about here in just a minute. But the Lakers gave up the third most 3-point attempts in the league per game. They allowed the 6th highest opponent 3-point percentage. They allowed the 10th most points in the paint per game. They allowed the 4th most second chance points, and they allowed the 4th most fast break points. So like there wasn't a phase of defense where they were great, except for not fouling. So which probably had a lot to do with everyone getting easy buckets on them, right? So like I think there's an analytic approach to defense as well, as it pertains to like you've got to find out what you can protect for sure. In this case, in all likelihood, protecting the paint is probably going to be the goal of this particular team, but we don't know what the roster looks like. But there are certain things that, regardless of your personnel, you can clean up through coaching in terms of preaching attention to detail and focus on fundamentals. So, like, this team has to be a good defensive transition team. You can't be giving up as many points in fast break situations as they did last year. This team has to find a way to at least take away either the rim or the 3-point line. It can't be neither. If it's neither, you have no chance to be an effective defense. So like, again, if we come out of this and Max Christie's the best perimeter defender on the roster going into training camp, then that probably needs to be a roster that loads up the strong side and shuts down the paint. That has to be like at least somewhat of the fundamental strong point. Or if they're more built around taking away the 3-point line, then there needs to be a focus on that in terms of not overhelping, staying home on shooters, giving up rim attempts at the expense of taking away those 3-point shots. What it can't be is what Darvin Ham built out last year, which is a defense that is good at nothing. And so again, like, just identifying whatever direction he wants to go with this roster when it's all built, and just kind of constructing a game plan that at least tightens up some of those areas. Because at the very least, you have to be like, if this is going to be an offensive oriented team, like let's pretend they go in on a offensive minded, trade piece that they bring in, and it's Austin, LeBron, AD, and some other great offensive player. And we're the super high powered 5-out offense, and we're top 5 in the league in offensive rating, blah, 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 blah. That's great. You still have to be at least a mediocre defense. They have to be in that 10 to 15 range at a minimum if they're an elite offense to be a legitimate threat. And that can be done just like the Denver Nuggets did last year, as long as you polish up all of those details, and you're great at least at some things. And so, again, just paying attention to the data, the attention to detail, holding players accountable, I think that's going to go a long way. All right, before we get into the offseason, I have some rapid fire questions for you surrounding the JJ hire. What has LeBron's involvement been with on the JJ Redick front in terms of him getting the job?
Apparently, it's not been involved. That's been what we reported at The Athletic. That's what we've heard from sources within the organization and also outside of the organization. I mean, Rich Paul came out and basically had a statement to Shams about LeBron not backing JJ, and basically just because they're podcast partners doesn't mean he wants him to be his head coach. So I think really this traces back to the Russell Westbrook situation and some of the fallout with that and the blame game from that. So I think ever since then, the front office and LeBron have not been they've not been working as closely as they were up to that point. So I think that it's been a little bit more of a separation of church and state, so to speak. And I think with LeBron, it was sort of like I'm probably going to get the blame here if they hire JJ and it doesn't work out. Like, I'm going to get some level of blame here because we have this podcast together. So I'm just like, I don't have a say in this. I'm removing myself. So, to my knowledge, zero. I mean, of course, on some level, like him having a podcast, like, we can't ignore him having a podcast with JJ and them seeing eye to eye on basically everything basketball wise. Like, there's some level of like, okay, well, you got the cosign there, but from my, to my knowledge, he was not involved in this process. So what do you think the Lakers mean when they say they view him as Pat Riley or Erik Spoelstra? Well, Pat Riley, I think there's a clear, that one, it's not just like the way he dresses or the hair. It's more so like making the jump from being a player to the broadcast booth to the coaching chair in a matter of just a few years. Now, Pat Riley he was an assistant coach for a couple years, so he at least had a little bit of experience before becoming a head coach. So that is one key difference. It's also, late 70s, early 80s, like they had one assistant coach. So it was like a much different process, and it was probably like a slightly easier process, right? Or even very much easier. But so that's one thing. But they see like the charisma, the gravitas, like him having that tough, competitive spirit. And they see a lot of the traits that the Lakers saw in Pat Riley that made them want to elevate him to being their head coach as traits that JJ Redick has as well. So nothing like basketball X's and O's necessarily, but more so of like just the personality, the charisma, the competitiveness, the desire to win at all costs. They see that in JJ Redick. So that's, and the Lakers, of course, like they tend to compare things to their past and the glory days. So like it's kind of funny that like that was the comparison. Now the Erik Spoelstra, Steve Kerr is more so like they want JJ to become a program builder, a culture setter, like those are the terms that they use, and have a coach in place for the next 10, 15 years. And it is interesting to me that he only signed a 4-year deal compared to the 6-year deal that was offered to Dan Hurley. But they're viewing this as like LeBron and AD probably have 2 more years, maybe 3 max together. And then there's going to be the next era of Lakers basketball. And can you build something sustainable here and be a stalwart and be, an iconic coach that transcends this era of Lakers basketball, that transcends maybe multiple iterations of Lakers basketball? And Steve Kerr obviously has been fortunate to have Steph and Draymond and Clay together for that whole time. But like looking at Erik Spoelstra when he came in, he came in right before the Heatles, and then so he had that version of like Dwayne Wade going out getting 30 and 10 every night, but they were a pretty bad team. Then they get the Heatles, then they have that kind of down period, and then they rebuild and get Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. Now they have this iteration, and now they might be going in a different direction potentially this offseason. So like Erik Spoelstra has been there for multiple generations of Heat basketball, and it's a very high bar for JJ to be coming in and be compared to those guys, but he's about to turn 40 next week, and he's incredibly young. And so like this is, I mean, if he wants to, he could coach till he's 65, 70. And, whether that ends up being with the Lakers or multiple teams, like only time will tell. But they want that type of guy, of like just a smart person who's going to adapt to how basketball is changing, and year over year change their coaching philosophy, change like how they view things. And that is something that JJ is pitching that he's going to do. And so I think those comparisons are more like a modern version of that. But the Pat Riley one, I think it's more just like the glory days, and they're just the path that they follow to becoming coaches.
Yeah, there's a lot of pressure there, but I think that JJ will handle that kind of pressure well and use it to fuel him. Two more quick ones before we get to the offseason. Did the podcast get mentioned at all during the interview process?
Not to my knowledge, but I was not in those conversations, so I can't. I would guess probably, but not to my knowledge.
If you had to quickly list off what you expect the assistant coaching staff to look like, what do you think?
Yeah, so the 4 names we reported at The Athletic are Sam Cassell. The Lakers would love for him to be a lead assistant. Scott Brooks, Rajon Rondo, and Jared Dudley. I don't expect all 4 of those names to be on the bench next season. I would expect maybe a couple of them. Sam could be in line to be promoted in Boston, with Charles Lee going over to Charlotte. Then Scott Brooks was recently let go by Portland. And then Rondo's dealing with some off-court legal stuff, so that's a potential hold up there. And then Jared Dudley, I mean, he was on Dallas's bench and they just made the NBA Finals, so he could potentially be in line for a promotion there, or just staying there because of the state that team is in right now. So I like Stan. This is just pure speculation here, but Stan Van Gundy is a name that to me I think would be an interesting one. Of just he's calling games for TNT right now, but JJ has said that is the best coach he's ever played for, and I think he would make a lot of sense either as an offensive or probably more of a defensive coordinator, but like either way, kind of being that lead guy if the Lakers can't land Sam Cassell. So pure speculation there for those who are about to aggregate that, but I think Stan Van Gundy would make a lot of sense. So the Lakers, I've heard though, they want at least one former head coach, if not 2, on this current staff, or on JJ's staff, as kind of a buffer with experience and just to help guide him through his first year.
Yeah, I am most concerned about them giving him somebody to help with just like the personality dynamics and navigating just the flow of an 82 game season and some of the postseason highs and lows that can take place after wins and losses. In terms of the tactics, I actually get really nervous about former head coaches, because like some of them tend to be a little bit stuck in their ways. The NBA is very different than what it was when Stan Van Gundy was last coaching at the NBA level. So like, but I don't worry about JJ with the tactics at all, because he's just he's crazy. He's crazy competitive. He loves the game. That dude will be buried in basketball ideologies for the next month, like for the next 3-4 months prepping for the season. I have no concerns about his ability to handle the tactical side of things. It's just, will he be able to handle the personality dynamics that are very different being a coach versus when you're just in the locker room as a player? And so like getting some head coaching experience just to help him navigate that, I think would be really useful. All right, we're just going to spend about 5-10 minutes on this, but obviously it's been 7-8 weeks since you and I last chatted. What do you think the current ideology is of the front office in terms of the direction you think they'll go this summer in terms of player personnel?
So what I've been hearing the last few weeks and what I've been reporting out has been the team leaning more toward small to medium upgrades to this roster, likely in the form of a couple separate deals with role players. So the mid-sized contracts that they have are Austin Reeves, Rui Hachimura, Jared Vanderbilt, potentially D'Angelo Russell if he opts in, and Gabe Vincent. So some form of trading, some combination of those guys, either packaging a couple of them together or doing a couple separate deals, and then using your picks, maybe using a Jalen Hood-Schifino to get a couple of upgrades, be it primarily like they need a wing upgrade. They need ideally like Rui Hachimura and Jared Vanderbilt have like a basketball baby, and like that is the starting small forward for the Lakers. That player's hard to find, but I think not having to do sort of like offense defense with those two, and having to pick and kind of give up one side of the ball. So that's going to be a point of emphasis for them, is trying to find that elusive 3-and-D wing, which they had multiple of them a few years ago, if you remember. KCP, Kyle Kuzma, and Alex Caruso, and now they've really struggled to find two-way talent over the last few years. So that is like priority number one for them, is figuring that out. Now, if D'Angelo Russell opts out and leaves, or opts out and is signed and traded somewhere, like all of a sudden you have that point guard hole, and you only have the non-taxpayer MLE to replace him with. So D'Angelo Russell really is the pivot point here, and I haven't got a great read on what he's likely going to do. I thought the Malik Monk contract was pretty interesting. It was a little bit lower than I was expecting for Malik Monk, and that could just be a sign of, with the new second apron rules and even the first apron rules, teams are going to be more conservative with their spending on non-all-stars and superstars. So a guy like D'Angelo Russell, in theory, you could maybe make the case of, could he get 20 million from a team, or 25? Maybe on paper that could be his value, but in actuality, like, it might not be the case. So a guy like D'Lo has to pick between, do I want the 18 million for 1 year and then test free agency the following season, or do I want maybe a smaller annual value deal for multiple years? So, but my sense in all this is the Lakers have been leaning more toward smaller moves, in part just because it gets really difficult to build out a good roster in 2024 when you have three guys making $40+ million. I mean, look at the Phoenix Suns. Like, that ultimately was, I think, what did them in, was just, and there was a limitation there, I think, to how those guys fit. I think there'd be a more natural fit between a guard, LeBron, and AD. Like, I think positionally it kind of makes a bit more sense, and like you could see the vision there. But after the Russell Westbrook situation, with the new second apron rules and the limitations with building out the roster, and the limitations that come with just even crossing the first apron, I think they're leaning that way. Now, I will say, like the Dan Hurley thing, it shook me a little bit in terms of like their ability to sort of misdirect. So I want to add the caveat of like, there's certainly the possibility that like the buzz coming out has been supporting cast upgrades and more minimal to marginal upgrades, but maybe there is a something that are working. But the problem with that, though, is we just don't even know who's available. Like right now, Atlanta has not clarified who's going to be available between Trae Young and DeJounte Murray. It could be both, could be neither, could be one. Donovan Mitchell has not signed his extension yet with Cleveland, so like that's a big one. Darius Garland is going to be kind of like the fallout guy with that if Donovan stays versus if Donovan asks out. So like there's still a lot of uncertainty as far as like which stars are even available right now. But I would not be surprised if like the Lakers kind of pull a smokescreen and all of a sudden it's like, well, they trade for star X that we were not expecting. But as of now, everything I've been hearing has been more, let's upgrade like the starting small forward spot, maybe the point guard spot if D'Lo is gone. And then let's go into next season with some measure of continuity and then a couple of upgrades.
I like that strategy within the context of LeBron and AD being healthy. Like if I just knew they were going to have another season like they did last year, I like that strategy just simply because like I thought LeBron and AD both played at a top 10 level through the entire season, and especially in that first round. I thought both LeBron and AD. I thought LeBron and AD just they straight up outplayed Jokic and Murray head to head. I thought AD kind of more or less met Jokic's level, and LeBron was better than Jamal Murray outside of a few clutch jump shots. But down the roster, Aaron Gordon, KCP, Michael Porter Jr., those dudes just absolutely dusted the D'Angelo Russell, Rui Hachimura group. Like they really struggled. And so like Austin Reeves was pretty good. Once again, shot 55% on pull-up jump shots. He's at 21 playoff games now, 17 points per game on 61% true shooting, which is awesome. And so like I kind of like that idea within the context of what we've seen in recent NBA history too. Cause like Dallas misses the playoffs last year. Make a couple of personnel tweaks. Like here's a good point of attack defender in Derek Jones Jr. Here's a forward in PJ Washington. Here's two vertical spacing threats in Lively and Gafford. Bam, all of a sudden they're in the finals. So like if your top two is as good as LeBron and AD are, and your third best player is as good as Austin Reeves is, then subtle tweaks can go a long way. Golden State 2021, they're mediocre, missed the playoffs. Bring in an Otto Porter Jr., bring in Gary Payton, bring in the Andrew Wiggins kind of buys into his role. Klay Thompson comes back. All of a sudden, they end up winning the championship. So, again, I think it's a little bit more complicated just with how talented the top of the league is. But if the reality is the D'Lo Rui piece was the weak point last year. I was actually this morning watching a bunch of film, just kind of just reminding myself what the Laker offense looked like because it's been so long since I've watched it. And Rui turned out to be the weak point on both ends of the floor. Too many possessions were ending with him getting wide open corner threes that he couldn't make. Too many driving closeouts into the lane where he'd smoke a layup or take some sort of bad mid-range pull-up jump shot. Not tracking Michael Porter Jr. on the other end of the floor, losing track of him, not battling enough physically underneath the basket. Rui just had a bad series, but Rui to me is a bench player who's masquerading as a starter for the Lakers. D'Angelo Russell is a redundancy next to Austin Reeves. And so I genuinely believe this. If the Lakers could get two high quality starters, not stars, just starters that play at the 2 and the 3 between Austin Reeves, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis, that just automatically puts them into a different tier as a basketball team. I think that would put them up in that group with the teams that are out of the play-in that are towards the top end of the Western Conference. But it's hard. Those are the two most desired positional archetypes around the league in terms of role players are the 2 and the 3, guys that guard opposing perimeter players and that are, offensive threats off the ball when teams throw extra attention towards your stars. So it's a lot to ask to go out and find that type of player. But as long as LeBron and AD are healthy, I like that strategy. My main concern is, what do you do if AD misses 30 games? What do you do if LeBron misses 30 games? If AD misses 30 games, you absolutely have to have some kind of legitimate center that can play and defend the rim and win contested rebound battles. Jackson Hayes and Christian Wood aren't those guys. So they have to find a legitimate backup center option because chances are AD will have to miss some chunk of games this year. And then on the LeBron James front, if he misses time, the Lakers ball handling tanks. And that's where it could be an issue where if you did have just role players and you didn't bring back, let's just say for the sake of argument, a DeJounte Murray. If you had a DeJounte Murray and a legitimate backup center, you just have more fortitude to deal with LeBron and AD injuries. But then the flip side of that is you're not winning the title unless LeBron and AD are healthy anyway. So I understand that perspective in the sense that you're basically betting our best version of ourselves is healthy LeBron AD playing at a top 10 level, Austin being the Manu Ginobili of the team, and 2 starting quality 2 and 3 that all come together for a postseason run. So again, there's just a certain amount of risk when you're building around a 40-year-old LeBron James and an Anthony Davis who's had a propensity to be, deal with injuries from time to time. But I am curious to see, and to your point about them coming out of the woodwork with some sort of random deal, it really just matters of what's available. That's really what matters. If you have a phone call with somebody and it's oh shit, we can get this guy or that guy, then yeah, you got to explore it. But if those aren't available and these high quality role players available, you got to go that way. It's not worth it to just invest in 2 low quality starters either, right? So again, it's really hard to make a call on these things just because we're so disconnected from it. But anyway, Jovan, we've already taken too much of your time. I really appreciate you making this work on short notice. It's good to see you again. It's been too long. I would imagine you and I are going to have a lot to talk about over the course of the next month. Isn't it funny how the NBA season works where it's oh, here's the trophy on Monday. The Celtics are champions. And then it's JJ Redick gets hired. The draft is on Wednesday. Free agency starts that weekend or whatever. It just never freaking ends, man. Before we get out of here, why don't you tell us about what you're working on over at The Athletic right now and on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, so I will be reporting out the JJ Redick press conference whenever that, likely Monday or Tuesday. He actually turns 40 on Monday, so wonder if he gets the day off from doing the buzzsaw of media that's going to be waiting for him, asking about podcasting and all that stuff. But yeah, so we'll be reporting all that out at The Athletic. So make sure to subscribe, and then also make sure to check out my YouTube channel. You can just search Jovan Buha or Buha's Block. That is my video podcast on there. So we'll be also reacting and uncovering everything that we're reporting out. So be on the lookout for that.
Thanks again, Jovan. Everybody get over there and subscribe to Jovan's YouTube channel, as well as supporting his work over at The Athletic. We are going to take the rest of the weekend off. On Monday, we have Sam Vecini, also from The Athletic, coming on the show. We're going to break down the NBA draft. Everything I talked about at the end of this week in terms of the 5 biggest takeaways from the postseason and the mailbag, thanks to the JJ Redick hire, we are pushing that to Tuesday, Wednesday next week, and then we will be reacting to the NBA draft on Thursday morning. As always, I sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting the show, and we will be back after the weekend on Monday.